Let the dynasty die with Henry VIII and we'll have dynastic wars again. Blood-witted barons ramping the country from end to end. Is that what you want?
This is the story of Thomas Wolsey. His meteoric ascent to power.
The dyer's hand is always stained by the elements he works with.
And dramatic fall from grace.
Here is my element. Spiritual element. The higher element. Now you tell me, am I stained by it?
He would be known as the other king, becoming the envy of the nobility, rising from insignificance to astonishing power. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey was a figure of immense influence during the reign of King Henry VIII. He navigated Tudor power with diplomatic finesse and administrative brilliance, managing to charm and befriend the king, and for a time keeping him satisfied with his capable statesmanship. Thomas Wolsey's beginnings were humble. He was born around the year 1473 in the town of Ipswich. As the son of a butcher and cattle dealer, he was not born into the nobility and would have been considered somewhat of a lowborn in those times. Despite his low social status in Tudor society, young Wolsey was gifted with the endowments of academic brilliance, strong ambition, and fantastic eloquence. He later became notorious for his pride, arrogance, and acquisitiveness. Recognizing his potential for learning, his parents ensured their son received a good education, which was a significant investment for a family of their means. He earned a place at Oxford University, where he began studying for a degree at just 15 years old. For this, he was nicknamed the Boy Bachelor. After completing his degree in theology, Wolsey worked as a priest and bursar for his college in Oxford. He then entered the church, being ordained as a priest in 1498. For some years, he worked in different clerical and ecclesiastical jobs, including some time under the Archbishop of Canterbury, and then in the household of a nobleman. By 1507, Wolsey's administrative genius caught the attention of King Henry VII, who appointed him as one of his royal chaplains. Wolsey benefited from Henry VII's introduction of measures to curb the power of the nobility. Being from a low-born background, he was chosen over a nobleman for the job, as he would be easier to control by the king. Now working as a secretary for one of the king's chief advisors, Wolsey continued to prove his ability. In one famous episode, Wolsey's remarkable work ethic caught the king off guard. He had sent Wolsey as a special envoy to the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian. Wolsey had traveled with great haste, going there and back in just 3 days. The angered king, believing him still preparing to leave, scolded him for poor time management. But Wolsey revealed that he'd already returned, much to the king's astonishment. In 1509, Henry VII had died, and the new King Henry VIII had been crowned. It was from this point onwards that Wolsey's ascent to power accelerated greatly. Henry VIII appointed Wolsey as royal almoner upon his accession to the throne. Wolsey easily persuaded the pleasure-seeking young monarch to surrender more and more of the unwelcome duties of state. Such were tasks Henry disliked in his earlier years as king. Henry shunning his duties as king during his early reign was a factor in Wolsey's rise to power. Wolsey endeavored to visit the king every day at his court and developed a close relationship with him. The ties between the two men became particularly close after Wolsey organized Henry's successful military expedition against the French in 1513. The advisors Henry VIII had inherited from his late father were careful, conservative, and anti-war. Wolsey had been the same way for a time, but had cleverly adapted his views to appease Henry's desire for war and glory, while the old advisors who failed to adapt quickly fell out of favor. Supporting Henry's insatiable desire for prestige, Wolsey masterminded the 1513 campaign to France, and in doing so greatly flattered him, making him feel like the warrior king he so strongly desired to be. Henry had grown up practically worshipping great English kings from history, such as Richard the Lionheart or Henry V, the latter who had won a legendary victory against the French just a century earlier. It was Wolsey's logistical brilliance that made the campaign a success. The logistical provision of food, beer, weapons and other supplies were largely arranged for by him. He established a spy network to protect the young king from betrayal by his allies and drew up the statutes of war to give the troops a code of conduct to follow. He even secured 12 enormous cannons, known as the 12 Apostles, to proudly boast Henry's military might. Wolsey did the hard work behind the scenes, while Henry got to enjoy the fun and bravado of leading his soldiers. It was the greatest force to head to France for 100 years. While achieving some success with the capture of 2 small French towns, the campaign had been very costly and was more of a vanity project. Henry's victory at the Battle of the Spurs was spent largely chasing down retreating French cavalry. But the key thing was that Wolsey had made Henry feel powerful and important, despite the campaign's limited success. He was to be richly rewarded for his services to the young king. The campaign had been a proving ground that was to catapult the highly competent Wolsey into the king's inner circle. By the late summer of 1514, Wolsey had played a key role in securing a peace deal with the French. Just 12 months earlier, it would have been inconceivable that the former royal almoner should control the direction of his country's diplomacy. But Henry would later assure the Pope that no one had laboured and sweated more to bring about the diplomatic revolution in European politics than his own Archbishop of York. Wolsey himself was not shy in acknowledging his own achievement, describing himself as the author of the peace. The big opportunity arose for Wolsey, as the former Archbishop of York, Christopher Bainbridge, had been tragically murdered in Italy. This opened up a vacancy at the perfect time for Henry to recommend Wolsey to the Pope, and so Wolsey drafted a letter for royal signature to be sent to him in Rome. The letter said that the king could do nothing of the least importance without Wolsey, and that the king esteems him among the dearest of his friends. The letter concluded that Wolsey should be made a cardinal, with all the honours held by the late Cardinal Bainbridge of York. On Henry's recommendation, Pope Leo X made Wolsey Bishop of Lincoln in February 1514, Archbishop of York in September 1514, and then Cardinal in 1515. In December 1515, Wolsey reached mega status, becoming Lord Chancellor of England, the king's second in command, after pressuring the king's old chief advisor William Warham to resign from his post. It is true that by 1514, Wolsey had become the controlling figure in virtually all matters of state. He accumulated numerous positions in Henry's government and also in the powerful church, which altogether made Wolsey the richest man in the kingdom, besides the king himself. From 1515 to 1529, Wolsey amassed a staggeringly vast fortune and many estates. His lucrative roles in the church made him upwards of £35,000 a year, an astonishing sum of money for the time. Even more astonishing was that Wolsey held a number of revenue-earning church positions in commendam, meaning to be given in trust. This rare privilege was usually granted to someone while a church office was temporarily without an actual occupant, but Wolsey benefited from this loophole for many years. This enabled him to draw a portion of the money from his church titles without needing to fulfill any of the associated duties. Wolsey's holding of multiple ecclesiastical offices at the same time was a sin known as pluralism. His absence can be seen with his tenure as the important Archbishop of York, which he began in 1514, yet he never even visited the city until 1529. And that concludes our first video on Thomas Wolsey. Let's have a recap of his life up to the year 1515. He is born of low origin, but quickly shows academic skill and goes to university. He does a number of jobs, gaining experience and proving himself to be a talented worker. He is employed by Henry VII and then by his son Henry VIII, continuing to demonstrate his exceptional ability. Wolsey's intelligence, administrative ability, industriousness, ambition and rapport with King Henry VIII, who was disinterested in matters of kingship, accelerates his rise to power. And lastly, his successful organisation of Henry's war with France in 1513 greatly flatters the king. Wolsey's ability to keep a large number of troops supplied and equipped for the duration of the war proved a major factor in the English success. He was also able to secure a favourable peace deal which benefited England. Wolsey took this significant opportunity to demonstrate his talents in foreign policy and reap the rewards of being made Cardinal and subsequently Lord High Chancellor of England. He had successfully climbed the ladder of power in Tudor England.